Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So I want you to imagine a victorious military general returning from a long, brutal campaign.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. The war is won, the enemy is completely defeated, but as he rides through the capital city, there is no ticker tape parade.
Not at all.
Nope. There are no cheering crowds, no brass bands, no celebratory feasts. Instead, the general is wearing the garments of mourning.
Oh.
Yeah, he is weeping in bitter grief. He's treating his own victory parade exactly as if it were a funeral.
That is just such a stunning visual, isn't it?
It really is. And this isn't some scene from a dystopian novel. It is a direct instruction from a 2.5 millennial-old leadership manual.
And it fundamentally challenges, everything we were taught about success, power, and really how to navigate a chaotic world.
That right there is the paradigm shift we are unpacking today. So welcome everyone to a very special deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is to extract the practical, life-altering wisdom from a profound ancient text detailing the concept of the Tao, or the way.
Specifically chapters 31 through 40, right?
Exactly. We are diving deep into the section of the text that transitions from this high-level cosmic philosophy into brutal, practical reality.
Gets very real, very fast.
It really does. We have a stack of translated sources and historical analyses, and we're going to look at how this incredibly old wisdom applies directly to you, the listener, right now in the 21st century.
Because it is surprisingly relevant.
Yeah. But before we get into weeping generals and the physics of power, we have to understand the soil this wisdom grew from. What kind of world was this author actually living in? Because, it wasn't a peaceful monastery.
Oh, far from it. Based purely on the text we have, we are looking at an author addressing a highly volatile, deeply fractured world.
Right.
This was a feudal society basically tearing itself apart. We're talking about a landscape dominated by princes, kings, and commanding generals, all vying for absolute supremacy.
So it's an era defined by just relentless, grinding conflict.
Precisely. And in that environment, as the text describes them, instruments of evil omen.
Meaning weapons.
Yeah, weapons were incredibly prevalent. It was a chaotic, high-stakes environment where people were literally fighting for survival on a daily basis. The stakes were territory, resources, and human lives.
And in that kind of environment, what happens to the human psyche? The leaders of this time became obsessed with profit, right?
Yes, profit, expanding their borders and asserting their own moral righteousness to justify their endless wars.
And enforcing incredibly strict rules of propriety to maintain control over a terrified populace.
Exactly. So the author is writing directly into the teeth of this chaos. The goal isn't just to wax poetic about nature.
Right. It's not just pretty poetry.
No, it is a survival guide. It's an attempt to guide both rulers and everyday individuals back to a natural state of harmony amidst a power-hungry and, frankly, deeply traumatized world.
Which feels entirely relevant today. I think we can all agree our modern world feels uniquely chaotic right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if our instruments of evil omen look a bit different, now they look more like algorithms, market manipulations, or literal modern weaponry.
Yeah, the core human issues haven't changed.
Right. But to understand the author's solution to this chaos, we first have to understand the fundamental force they claim governs everything. The text refers to it as the Tao.
Right, the Tao.
And it describes it as an unchanging, nameless, all-pervading force found on both the left and the right.
Yes, the text is very specific about the nature of this force. What's fascinating here is how it emphasizes that the Tao produces all things, but claims no credit.
Claims no credit at all.
None. It says it clothes all things as with a garment and makes no assumption of being their Lord. It is the origin point. Creation itself, the text argues, sprang from the Tao as non-existent.
It's basically the invisible engine of reality.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so I think we need a modern framework here, because trying to grasp something that is everywhere but completely invisible and claims zero credit, well, it's incredibly tough for our brains.
It is very abstract.
Right. So for you listening, think about the Tao like the underlying code of a complex operating system, or actually even better, let's use the analogy of gravity.
Oh, gravity is a perfect analogy.
Because gravity is completely invisible, right? You can't touch it, you can't see it, it doesn't shout for attention or demand a promotion.
It doesn't have a PR team.
Exactly. It seemingly does nothing visibly, yet it holds the entire universe together. It keeps the planets in orbit, it keeps the oceans in their beds, and it does all of this without a single meeting or performance review.
That is a highly effective analogy because it captures the central paradox of the text. The author states plainly that the Tao does nothing for the sake of doing it, and so there is nothing which it does not do.
Right.
This introduces the concept of natural emergence versus forced action.
Okay, I have to stop you right there and push back a little bit.
Go for it.
Because this is where ancient philosophy crashes headfirst into modern reality. Doing nothing sounds beautiful on a mountaintop, but how do you actually run a Fortune 500 company on doing nothing?
Right, the practical application.
Yeah, I mean, if I do nothing at my job, I get fired. If I do nothing in my marriage, it falls apart. At some point, you have to set a Q3 target. You have to pay the mortgage.
Of course.
So how does doing nothing lead to nothing being left undone in a practical sense?
That is the exact friction point everyone hits when they first encounter this text. But we have to look closely at the phrasing. It says doing nothing for the sake of doing it.
For the sake of doing it.
Yes. It isn't advocating for apathy or laziness or neglecting your responsibilities. It is talking about the removal of contrived, anxious, forceful interference.
Okay, that makes more sense.
The author uses a beautiful meteorological image to explain this. They write that heaven and earth unite together and send down the sweet dew, which, without the directions of men, reaches equally everywhere as of its own accord.
The sweet dew reaching everywhere without human direction. I want to linger on that for a second.
Think about the mechanics of dew. The dew doesn't strategize. The grass doesn't reach up and pull the moisture down from the air.
Right, there is no project manager coordinating the condensation.
Exactly. It is a natural, effortless consequence of atmospheric equilibrium. The temperature drops, the air reaches saturation, and the water simply appears, nourishing everything equally.
So it's just physics happening naturally.
Yes. And the author is suggesting that human systems and natural systems are not actually separate. If leaders, or if we as individuals, could hold to this primordial simplicity.
If we stop trying to micromanage the universe.
Right. If we did that, the right outcomes would spontaneously emerge just like the dew.
So it's about recognizing the underlying mechanics of a situation and letting them work rather than trying to manually force the gears to turn.
Exactly. When you ask how you run a Fortune 500 company on this principle, think about the worst managers you've ever had. What do they do?
Oh man, they micromanage, they demand constant updates, they force artificial timelines.
Yes. They interfere with every process because they believe that their active, visible exertion of force is the only reason the work gets done.
And what happens? The team burns out. Morale plummets. The work ultimately suffers. The manager's constant doing actually prevents the system from functioning.
Right. Now think of the best leaders. They set the conditions, they ensure the environment is right, and then they step back.
They trust the system.
They do nothing visibly on a day-to-day tactical level, allowing the natural talent and intrinsic motivation of their team to emerge. They're acting like the cow.
Wow, yeah. They clothe the project in resources, but they don't constantly assert their lordship over it.
It is the absolute antithesis of 21st century hustle culture.
Completely. I mean, from the moment we wake up, we are taught to force outcomes. We believe in a completely linear and mechanical worldview. If I want X, I must push Y with maximum force.
We try to biohack our sleep, micromanage our diets, relentlessly network.
And most importantly, we demand visible credit for our work. We want our name on the slide deck. We want the blue check mark.
But the text says the Tao claims no credit. It is the ultimate silent partner.
And that anonymity is deeply threatening to the modern ego, isn't it?
Very much so. Our culture equates visibility with value. But the text argues that the sage accomplishes great achievements precisely through his not making himself great.
That's powerful.
Think about the sheer amount of psychological energy you spend every day protecting your status, managing your optics, worrying about who gets the credit, and trying to force people to see your value.
It's exhausting. It's a massive energy leak.
It is. When you start demanding the spotlight, when you stop forcing outcomes just to prove you are in control, all of that tied-up energy is suddenly freed. You become a conduit for the work, rather than a dam trying to control a river.
So let's make this actionable for you, the listener. Where in your professional or personal life are you currently trying to force a result?
That's the key question.
Where are you exhausting yourself trying to manually control every variable of a project, or perhaps trying to force a relationship to be something it currently isn't?
It happens all the time.
Your practice for this week is to experiment with stepping back. Just observe. create the right conditions, and then see how doing nothing for the sake of doing it, meaning removing your anxious, ego-driven interference, might actually allow the right solution to emerge organically.
It requires a terrifying amount of trust to step back like that. Which brings us to the next massive shift in the text.
Right, segment 2.
If the universe operates effortlessly and without force, then we have to radically redefine what it means to be strong, successful individuals. We have to move from the cosmic scale of gravity and dew down to the deeply personal internal battle.
Yes, if true strength isn't about being a bulldozer, what is it? The text sets up a series of incredible piercing contrasts here in chapter 33.
It really does.
It says, "He who knows other men is discerning, but he who knows himself is intelligent. He who overcomes others is strong, but he who overcomes himself is mighty."
It is a complete inversion of the feudal warrior mindset, and frankly, it completely upends our modern corporate mindset too.
It does. Let's break down that first part. Knowing others, doing market research, reading the room, analyzing a competitor's weaknesses, understanding consumer psychology. Sure, the text admits that's discerning.
It's a valid skill.
It is. But it says knowing yourself is true intelligence. And conquering others makes you strong, but conquering yourself makes you mighty. I look at our society and I feel like we spend 99% of our lives trying to be strong.
Trying to dominate the external world.
Exactly. And we completely ignore the pursuit of mightiness.
And this explains a psychological phenomenon we see constantly today. Think about the people who achieve massive, undeniable external success. The quote-unquote strong ones who have conquered their markets, destroyed their competitors, and amassed vast wealth.
Yeah.
Why are so many of them deeply miserable, paranoid, or burnt out?
Because they conquered the boardroom, but they never conquered their own minds.
Precisely.
They are ruled by their own insecurities, their need for validation, their fear of losing what they've built.
Exactly. They have endless strength, but zero might. They are slaves to their own unchecked desires, which is why the text adds another brilliant line right after. It says, "He who is satisfied with his lot is rich."
True wealth is not the endless accumulation of resources.
No, it is the absolute cessation of wanting. It is the internal mastery that allows you to say, this is enough.
The cessation of wanting, that is a tough pill to swallow in a consumer economy designed specifically to manufacture desire.
It really goes against the grain.
But this idea of internal mastery over external force leads us to what is easily the most counterintuitive and honestly the most uncomfortable part of this deep dive.
Chapter 36.
Yes. If we aren't supposed to meet force with force, how do we handle actual aggressive opposition? The text introduces a concept called hiding the light.
This is where people usually get tripped up.
I can see why. It says when he is going to weaken another, he will first strengthen him. When he's going to overthrow another, he will first have raised him up. And then it concludes, the soft overcomes the hard and the weak the strong.
I'm glad you brought this up because to modern ears, that first part, strengthening someone in order to weaken them, sounds incredibly Machiavellian.
Wait, I have to stop you. It sounds completely manipulative.
Right.
It sounds like you are setting a sociopathic trap. You flatter your rival, you puff up their ego, you give them more power just so you can pull the rug out from under them and watch them fall. How on earth does that fit with the natural, effortless harmony of the Tao? It sounds malicious.
That is the exact trap of reading ancient texts with a modern cynical lens.
Okay, so correct my lens here.
This requires careful, objective discernment. The author is not advocating for malicious interpersonal deception. They are observing the fundamental physics of the universe, specifically the natural laws of expansion and contraction.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. How does strengthening a system cause it to collapse without it being a trick?
Think of a pendulum.
Mm-hmm.
If you want a pendulum to swing violently to the left, what is the most effective way to achieve that? You don't stand on the left side and try to pull it.
No, you'd be fighting the momentum.
Exactly. You push it as far to the right as it can possibly go.
Yeah.
You elevate it to its maximum height on the opposing side, and then you simply let go. Gravity does the rest.
Ah, you raise it up to bring it down. The extremity of the position guarantees the opposite reaction.
Precisely. When something is pushed to its absolute extreme limit, it naturally inevitably prepares for its own decline. Let's look at it in the business world. When a company becomes an unchecked monopoly.
When it is strengthened to the point of having zero competition.
Exactly. What happens internally?
Well, they get bloated. They stop innovating because they don't have to. The customer service gets terrible because people have nowhere else to go. Hubris sets in.
Yes, the lack of friction destroys their internal innovation loop. Their massive strength becomes the exact mechanism of their weakness. They become blind, arrogant, and brittle, sowing the seeds of their own destruction.
That makes total sense.
The text refers to this understanding as hiding the light. It's not about tricking your opponent. It is a profound recognition of natural cycles. You don't need to exhaust your energy fighting rigid, hyper-aggressive entities directly.
Because you understand that their own hyperaggression will eventually be their undoing.
Because rigid things snap under pressure. Which perfectly explains the next line. The soft overcomes the hard.
Society conditions us to believe that we must meet force with force, though. We operate on what we might loosely call a Newtonian action-reaction social physics. Hard against hard.
We do.
If a coworker yells at you, you yell louder to establish dominance. If a competitor cuts prices aggressively, you slash yours even lower to bleed them out. It becomes a race to the bottom of the hardness barrel.
And what happens when two hard, rigid objects collide at full speed?
They both shatter.
Exactly. Meeting force with force just creates a catastrophic collision. But look at the natural world. Look at water. Water is the softest, most yielding substance on Earth. You can't strike it, you can't break it. Yet given enough time, it will carve through the hardest granite mountain. It yields, it adapts, it flows around the obstacle, and in doing so, it ultimately conquers the stone.
Meeting force with softness doesn't mean you surrender, then.
No, not at all. It means you absorb the kinetic impact and redirect the energy rather than shattering against it.
That is such a powerful visual. The Grand Canyon wasn't carved by a giant hammer. It was carved by persistent, yielding softness.
Exactly.
So for you, the listener, I want you to think of your biggest current conflict. It could be a highly aggressive boss, a deeply stubborn family member, or a ruthless business rival. Are you trying to be strong by overpowering them, meeting their hard, rigid energy with your own hard, rigid energy?
It's the default reaction for most of us.
Or can you be mighty by overcoming your own ego's desperate need to win the collision? How can you apply softness today?
Sometimes that just means pausing.
Right. Maybe that looks like active, silent listening when someone is yelling, rather than defending yourself. Maybe it means yielding a minor point to diffuse their momentum. Maybe it's just stepping entirely out of the path of their anger and letting them exhaust themselves. How can you be water against their rock?
It is a radical, almost terrifying shift in perspective because it requires you to drop your armor. But it is a necessary shift because the text makes it chillingly clear what happens when we fail to learn this lesson.
Yeah, the consequences are severe.
When we rely solely on hardness, on external force, and on the illusion of control, it inevitably leads to absolute tragedy. This is where the ancient author pivots from the internal, personal philosophy directly into the political, the societal, and frankly, the deadly.
Right. If matching force with force is a failure on a personal level, what happens when human beings organize and do it on a massive scale? This brings us to chapter 31, where the author takes on the ultimate expression of human force, the military.
The ultimate hard force.
The text states, now arms, however beautiful, are instruments of evil omen, hateful, it may be said, to all creatures. Therefore, they who have the Tao do not like to employ them.
We have to remember the historical context we established at the beginning. This was the Warring States period, or something very much like it. A successful general was the ultimate celebrity, the apex predator of this era.
Right.
Military conquest was glorified, incentivized, and celebrated as the highest achievement of the state.
Which makes what the author says next incredibly subversive, almost treasonous for the time. The text dictates that a superior person prizes calm and repose and uses sharp weapons only on the compulsion of necessity.
But here's where we get back to that visual that started this whole deep dive, the visual that just stops you in your tracks.
Yes, the victory parade.
The author dictates how a society must handle a military victory. In their culture, the left hand was the position of honor, of joy, and festivity. The right hand was the position of mourning, associated with funerals and death.
And the text states that a victorious general commanding an army should stand on the right.
It explicitly says his place, that is assigned to him, as in the rites of mourning.
The author is literally demanding that a military victory parade be treated exactly like a funeral. Think about the psychological inversion of that.
That's massive.
The medals, the cheering crowds, the monuments to the victors. The author strips all of the glory away and says, He who has killed multitudes of men should weep for them with the bitterest grief, and the victor in battle has his place rightly according to those rights.
This raises a profound question about the soul of a society. The philosophical implication here is staggering. A society that celebrates conquest, that finds joy and identity in the domination and destruction of others, is fundamentally spiritually broken.
It's lost the Tao completely.
Exactly. Force, even when it achieves a desired strategic outcome, never truly aligns with the Tao. It is always a rupture in the natural harmony.
But I want to highlight the stark realism of the text here too, because we have to use wisdom with discernment. The author doesn't demand absolute utopian pacifism.
No, they are very grounded in reality.
They aren't ignoring the violent reality of their world. They acknowledge that weapons might be used on the compulsion of necessity. Sometimes defending yourself, your family, or your society is unavoidable.
Right.
But what they completely remove is the glory. There is zero glory in the application of force.
Exactly. It is the vast psychological difference between doing something because you absolutely must to survive and doing something because you delight in the power it gives you over another human being.
There is a big difference.
The text warns that victory by force of arms is to him undesirable. To consider this desirable would be to delight in the slaughter of men. And he who delights in the slaughter of men cannot get his will in the kingdom.
Wow.
If your internal orientation is toward destruction and dominance, you can never achieve true, lasting leadership. The system will eventually reject you.
And obviously, we have to look at this through an impartial lens. We aren't taking sides in any specific historical or modern geopolitical conflict. We are using this text as a mirror to view human nature.
Right. It applies across the board.
When we translate this literal battlefield into our modern adversarial environments, it is incredibly convicting. Think about the corporate world. Think about a brutal, hostile takeover.
Or aggressive litigation that bankrupts a rival.
Yes. Or, on a more everyday level, think about utterly destroying someone in the court of public opinion on social media.
The dopamine hit of cancel culture. Yep. The modern equivalence of the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. We might not be using bronze swords, but we use lawsuits, viral takedowns, and market manipulation as our sharp weapons. And when we win these modern battles, what do? We gloat.
We post about our victory on LinkedIn.
Right. We celebrate the destruction of the competitor. We high-five in the boardroom. The ancient wisdom here is telling us that even if a harsh professional battle is strictly necessary for your survival, say, firing a deeply toxic employee who is ruining the company, or fighting off an unjust, predatory lawsuit.
Things that have to be done.
Yeah, things that must be done. But it should never, ever be celebrated. Gloating is a spiritual failure.
It is a profound spiritual failure because it reveals that you have lost connection to the shared humanity, the shared underlying Tao that connects you even to your adversary.
You've lost the plot.
The author's saying, if you must use force, do it quickly, do it cleanly, do it only out of absolute necessity, and then mourn the fact that the situation devolved to the point where force was required at all. You weep for the necessity of the act.
So, a reflection for you listening right now. How do you treat your victories over competitors or rivals? When you win the argument with your spouse, when you get the promotion over a coworker, when you successfully defend your perf against a rival department?
Can you shift your mindset from celebration to solemnity?
Can you recognize the systemic cost of that victory?
It is a critical practice in maintaining your humanity in a hyper-competitive world. Because if you don't do this, if you let the delight of victory and the reliance on force take root, you begin a societal descent.
Which the text maps out for us.
Yes. The text provides a very specific, chillingly accurate roadmap for how that descent happens. How do societies or organizations or even individuals slowly lose their way, moving from natural harmony down into rigid, lifeless enforcement?
This brings us to what might be the most fascinating and immediately recognizable part of this entire deep dive, the downward spiral. Let's look at the concepts in chapters 38 and 39 regarding the loss of the Tao. The author gives us a literal hierarchy of decline.
The descent of society.
It reads, when the Tao was lost, its attributes appeared. When its attributes were lost, benevolence appeared. When benevolence was lost, righteousness appeared. And when righteousness was lost, the proprieties appeared.
We need to define propriety here in the context of the translation. It doesn't just mean being polite, like saying please and thank you.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It means strict rules of etiquette, rigid compliance, manners, and outward performative optics. The text goes on to make a devastating critique, stating that propriety is merely the attenuated form of leal-heartedness.
Meaning it's a watered-down, hollow version of genuine loyalty or good faith.
And worst of all, propriety is actually the commencement of disorder.
Wait, if propriety is the commencement of disorder, that completely upends our entire concept of civilization. We are taught from childhood that manners, rules, and compliance are exactly what separate us from disorder.
It's a massive paradox. To understand why rules are the beginning of disorder, you have to look at the progression. The author is describing the decay of trust.
Let's use a business analogy here. When I read this, it mapped perfectly onto the life cycle of almost every startup company I've ever seen. Let's walk through this ancient hierarchy using a modern tech startup as the example.
Oh, I like where this is going. Let's do it. Phase 1, the Tao.
Right. Phase 1. In the very beginning, in the proverbial garage phase, there are 4 founders. They are naturally aligned to the vision. They are operating in the flow state, the Tao. There is no employee handbook.
Because they don't need one.
Right. They are working until 2 in the morning eating cold pizza, not because there is a rule that they have to, but because the shared purpose is so overwhelmingly strong. Everyone intuitively knows what to do. There is absolute trust.
This is the primordial simplicity. The system works effortlessly without being forced, but what happens as they scale?
They grow. They hire 50 people. They can't all fit in the garage anymore. They start to lose that unspoken, magical connection to the core vision. The Tao is lost. So what happens next in the hierarchy? Benevolence appears.
The founders realize the natural magic is fading, so they actively try to recreate it. They decide they need to be, quote-unquote, good to the employees.
Exactly. They put ping pong tables in the break room. They write a sweeping aspirational mission statement about making the world a better place. It is still positive, but the crucial difference is that it is now something they have to consciously, deliberately try to do rather than something they just naturally are.
As the text profoundly notes, when they rely on benevolence, they're always seeking to carry it out and had no need to be doing so. It has become an effort. It is no longer natural.
And as the company scales to 500 people, benevolence fails. You can't run a mid-size enterprise on ping pong tables and good vibes. People have conflicts, managers play favorites, the good faith fractures. So when benevolence is lost, what appears? Righteousness.
Righteousness is about defining strict moral categories. Who is right and who is wrong?
Yes. The company brings in external consultants. They draft strict core values. They institute formal performance reviews where you are graded on a scale of 1 to 5 on your alignment. Righteousness is adversarial. It is about judging people against a defined standard.
It assumes that people will not naturally do the right thing, so they must be measured and corrected.
And when men do not respond to righteousness, when they feel judged, micromanaged, and resentful, what is the final stage of the decline?
Total corporate lockdown. Righteousness is lost and propriety appears.
The HR department steps in and enforces absolute rigid compliance. They mandate a draconian dress code. They enforce exact clock-in and clock-out times. They install software to track your mouse movements on your computer to ensure you are working.
They enforce superficial politeness in emails just to avoid lawsuits.
And this, as the ancient author warns, is the true commencement of disorder.
Exactly. Because when a company is relying on propriety, when leadership is obsessing over the optics of exactly how many minutes you took for your lunch break, the spirit of the company is already dead.
The underlying good faith is completely gone.
People are complying out of fear, not out of belief. They will find every loophole possible. The rules didn't prevent the disorder. The necessity of the rules proves the disorder has already won.
That is such a brilliant translation of the ancient dynamic, and this concept of the letter of the law replacing the spirit of the law is a massive comparative insight.
You find this exact warning across almost every major wisdom tradition globally. Whenever human beings lose touch with the deep, inward truth, they substitute it with outward, performative rules. They mistake the map for the territory.
Performative is the exact right word for our current era.
The author differentiates between these two states of being beautifully. They write that the great man abides by what is solid and eschews what is flimsy. He dwells with the fruit and not with the flower.
Fruit versus flower.
Propriety, strict rules of optics, superficial cleverness, these are just the flimsy flowers. They look nice for a moment, they make a nice display, but they offer zero sustenance. The solid food is the deep character, the genuine internal alignment with the Tao.
And this leads right into the massive obstacle to growth for us today. The modern world relies so heavily, almost exclusively, on the flimsy flower. We love metrics, we love optics, we curate our Instagram feeds to look absolutely flawless.
We use carefully calibrated corporate speak on LinkedIn to sound effortlessly professional, performing our propriety for the algorithm.
We are obsessed with appearing, as the text describes it, elegant looking as jade. It is deeply uncomfortable for us to consider that our obsession with compliance, etiquette, and looking perfect might actually be the root cause of our societal anxiety and disorder.
It is uncomfortable because the antidote the text prescribes is the exact opposite of what our society rewards. The text states that true dignity finds its root in lowness. It says great leaders view themselves as orphans or men of small virtue. They don't wish to be elegant, polished jade. They prefer to be coarse, unpolished, like an ordinary stone.
An ordinary stone. Think about the profound psychological relief in that concept. You don't have to polish yourself to a high gloss for everyone to admire. You don't have to perfectly curate your personal brand. You can just be solid, authentic, unpretentious, and real.
It's so freeing.
The text uses a wonderful mechanical analogy here, too. It says that if you enumerate the different parts of a carriage, the spokes, the wheels, the heavy wood, you don't actually come upon what makes it work, what makes a wheel function. It's the empty space in the middle, the hub, the hole where the axle goes.
Which perfectly ties together the entire philosophy of this section. The utility of the vessel is in its emptiness. The power of the leader is in their humility, their lack of rigid ego.
Yeah.
When leaders call themselves orphans, they're openly acknowledging a profound truth. Without the people, without the natural flow of the Tao supporting them, they're entirely powerless. They find the foundation of their absolute dignity in their very lack of pretense.
So we are challenged today to look at our own leadership, our own parenting styles, our own intimate relationships. Are we demanding superficial respect and rigid compliant propriety, or are we doing the much harder work of cultivating deep, unforced connection?
That is the daily practice.
Your practical application here for this week: examine the rules you enforce in your home or your workplace. Why do they exist? Are you obsessing over the flimsy flower? Are those strict rules actually just a substitute for a lack of genuine connection or shared purpose?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
And how can you embrace being the coarse, ordinary stone this week, rather than exhausting yourself striving to look like elegant jade for people who don't truly know you?
It requires a courageous stripping away of the unnecessary. It requires trusting that if you let go of your rigid, anxious control, the natural harmony of the system will reassert itself.
It is a complete rewiring of how we interact with reality, moving from a mindset of forcing, fighting, and performing to a mindset of yielding, aligning, and simply being. And that brings us to one final provocative thought for you to take with you, to mull over on your own.
Chapter 40.
Yes, Chapter 40. Throughout this entire deep dive, we've talked about the immense power of the invisible, the conquering strength of the soft, and the lasting value of the fruit over the flashy flower. The text leaves us with a mind-bending origin story to ponder. All things under heaven sprang from it as existing, that existence sprang from it as non-existent. Everything came from nothing.
It's a profound thought.
If the most profound things, the most creative forces in the universe, come from nothing, from the empty space in the hub of the wheel, from the silence between the musical notes, from the pause between breaths, what empty space, what quiet, unstructured non-existence do you need to fiercely protect in your own packed schedule today so that something entirely new can spring forth? We are so terrified of the void, so terrified of doing nothing that we miss the sweet dew entirely. Maybe it's time to stop trying to be the hammer and remember the invisible gravity holding it all together.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.